My childhood was a wonderful childhood. I grew up in a small town, Lamarck, Texas, in very good schools, and I had a wonderful growing up period. The main thing I guess I did for discipline was took ballet, and I took ballet every afternoon of the week, and then on weekends I went to Houston to be in the Houston Youth Symphony Ballet. The ballet taught me a lot about overcoming pain to be able to dance and keep on going and keep on practicing, and that practice is everything and getting ahead. But I will say, I think where I might have gotten my drive was reading biographies when I was in elementary school. I read every biography in the elementary school library, and they were biographies of our founding fathers, and I read those, and I think it did inspire me to want to be successful. I didn't think of being president of the United States or anything like that, but I did get the sense that people sacrificed, they overcame obstacles, and that might have been why I always thought that I could do what I wanted to do. I loved law school. It was the first time I loved school. That's where I learned to study. I learned to love the back and forth. I loved the intellectual challenge of law school, and it was really the beginning of an interest in academics for me. None of the big firms had women. They didn't have women in the regular track. A couple of my classmates who had gone out a couple of years earlier were hired, but they were told they'd never be partners. So that was kind of the atmosphere that we had, and the interviewers, the lawyers, pretty much said the reason we don't hire women is because we know you're going to get married, and we make a big investment in our first year associates, and we don't want to lose that investment because you get married and move away, or you decide to have a family. That was what they said. So I ended up deciding to try to use my law degree in a different way because I could see that there was no future. And so I stopped at a television station that was near my apartment where I lived. And so the news director actually came out to talk to me, and he said, well, we've never had a lawyer apply for a job before, and I'm very interested because at the time there were no women on any of the stations in Houston either. And the news director said, don't take another job until I've talked to you. I don't have it in my budget to have another news reporter, but this could be something that we would do. And I got another job offer, and it was about the time I covered the legislature as well as the courts. And really the legislature is where I learned so much, and it was so much fun. And the Republican county chairman asked me if I would be interested in running for the legislature. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to think about that, because I hadn't thought about it at all, because I was 28 years old. And so I said, I went back to talk to her, and I said, well, so what would I do? And so she told me that there had been redistricting, and so for the first time in Harris County, there were going to be single-member districts. And there's one man in it who has served in the legislature before, and I'd want you to talk to him and see if he is going to run again. And if he isn't, ask him to be your campaign manager. I did that. I went to Glenn Purcell, And he was a wonderful man, just wonderful. He was a retired engineer, and he said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to run." And so I said, "Well, would you help me run?" And he said, "I will." And I was elected, and I was the only Republican woman in the Texas House at that time. The only one. I mean, we were just starting really to have Republicans, and at the time that I was elected, there were 13 Republicans out of 150 in the House of Representatives. I was the only woman, and that was just the beginning of the Republican Party in 1972. If you wanted to do anything, you had to work with the other side. You're 13 and they're 147. I mean, it was, or I guess 137. So we worked together on things like I teamed up with Sarah Weddington to pass a bill to help victims of rape be treated as victims. And we actually passed a law that was the model that was used by many states following our lead to give better treatment to victims of rape. When, first of all, your friendships and your colleagues, it's a very special relationship. But secondly, it's feeling like you're doing something that's really making a difference in people's lives. And I've had so many wonderful experiences of people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, thank you for passing that bill. It made such a difference in my life." And that's what keeps people in politics going, is that feeling that you're making a difference. You're doing things that really matter. Well, I was in the legislature, and then I was appointed. I left the legislature after I'd served 2 terms and a constitutional convention. It was really every year. We had the legislative session, the constitutional convention, the legislative session again. I was running for re-election, and Gerald Ford's administration called and offered me a position as vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I had been active in transportation in the legislature, and so I decided to do that, to expand my horizons, and so I did. I left the legislature and I went to Washington. I was vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. Clinton was elected president, and Lloyd Bentsen, who was the United States Senator, was appointed Secretary of the Treasury. And I learned later, much later, that Ann Richards told Bill Clinton that she couldn't hold the Senate seat if he appointed Lloyd Bentsen. And he did appoint Lloyd Bentsen anyway. And she knew, which I hadn't decided to run for the Senate. I really didn't have any interest in federal issues. I was in the state treasurer's office. I loved what I was doing, and I wasn't thinking of a federal race. But she saw that long before it was even a decision. But Lloyd Bentsen became the U.S. Treasury Secretary. Ann Richards appointed Bob Kruger to be the U.S. Senator until the special election, which by state law had to be within like 3 to 6 months. And so the special election was held in May, and I got in a runoff with Bob Kruger, and then the runoff was in June, and I was elected. And that was the first time Texas ever had 2 Republican senators. So that was a big breakthrough for Republicans. But then I had to run again because I only was serving until the end of Bentsen's term, which was then the 1994 election. So I served through 1993 and then was running again right away for the election in 94. and Bush was running against Dan Richards in 94. And so I was at the top of the ticket, and then Bush. And that's when we then took over the governorship and the Senate seat. I held the Senate seat. But then there was still a Democrat in the lieutenant governor's seat and, on down the ballot. So we were still a fledgling party in 1994, but the first breakthrough was mine in 1993, and then 94 we added, and then eventually it became much easier. If you're interested in being a lawyer, just go visit a courthouse. Courthouse rooms, the courtrooms are open to the public, and you can go in and you can see trials. You can see how things work, and if that interests you. Of course, being a lawyer is not just being in the courtroom, but that's a good way to start getting an interest. There's so many things you can do with a law degree that is not necessarily practicing law. It can be, and it prepares you for that, but it also prepares you for so many different options. And when you know the thinking, the legal thinking, not necessarily the law, but the legal thinking, then you can do things with business, you can do things with charitable groups, you can do things with community groups, you can run for public office. But I always advise young people to have a career that's not politics, and do politics when you have something that you know well, because then you'll have more experience and be better if you do decide to run, starting with city council or state representative or county commissioner. You will have the ability to serve better if you've had experience. And also you'll be a better person to represent others if you don't always look for re-election. If instead you look for doing a great job and doing it right, and not always doing what is the thing that will get you reelected.